We often treat the end of life as a purely biological failure, a machine powering down until the heart stops. But clinicians working in the quiet of a medical ward describe a process that follows an unexpectedly organized sequence. Hospice care identifies a distinct phase called withdrawal without emptiness. Patients stop eating, sleep for longer periods, and turn their attention entirely inward. They often begin speaking in metaphors, talking about packing bags or waiting for a train. While these statements are frequently dismissed as confusion, the patients appear oriented toward a specific transition. This pattern is punctuated by terminal lucidity. This is a documented phenomenon where patients with severe, late-stage brain damage, people who haven't spoken or recognized their families in years, suddenly regain full clarity. They engage in coherent, emotional conversations for a few hours before passing away. When researchers like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross began documenting these bedside patterns, they found they were not random biological misfires. Instead, they observed a structured relational shift, where the dying often took an active role in resolving old conflicts. These occurrences suggest a disconnect between organ failure and mental clarity. It appears that the mind may follow a trajectory that does not strictly mirror the decline of the body. When patients cross the clinical threshold and return, they describe a remarkably consistent set of experiences. Across cultures, they report moving through a vortex of light and witnessing a panoramic review of their own memories. Skeptical neurology views the brain as a powerful reality engine. When the system faces a terminal threat, it may generate these elaborate narratives to help the organism cope with extreme trauma. As oxygen drops, the visual cortex fails. Perception constricts inward, leaving a central point of light. Simultaneously, the brainstem activates dream circuitry while the body is paralyzed, projecting a vivid narrative into waking awareness. While these events feel more real than everyday life to the patient, neurology demonstrates the brain possesses the mechanisms to simulate an afterlife to soothe the dying system. Mapping the chemical triggers of a dying brain, however, does not explain why those triggers produce subjective feeling. This is the hard problem of consciousness, the gap between physical chemistry and the actual internal experience of being alive. This gap drives the ultimate dispute in the science of death. We do not yet know if the brain generates the mind like a power plant, or if it merely filters and transmits it like a radio receiver. Philosopher William James proposed that the brain might have a transmissive role. He argued that while destroying a radio stops the music in a room, the radio itself didn't create the broadcast. It only provided the hardware necessary for the signal to be heard. Modern physicists, like Nobel laureate Roger Penrose, suggest that standard neuroscience is fundamentally incomplete. They argue that consciousness may emerge from quantum processes that current biological models cannot yet measure. Neurology proves that the mind depends on the brain for expression during life, but it has yet to prove the brain is the sole manufacturer of the mind, leaving the possibility of survival an open scientific question. Since medicine and physics cannot provide a definitive map of what lies beyond, the question shifts from what we can prove to how we should act. Global spiritual traditions differ on the mechanics of death, but they reach a consensus on the utility of facing it. They treat the end of life as a tool for clarifying the values of the present. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition views death as a transition for a mind stream. Because they believe the quality of this transition is determined by current habits and attachments, the awareness of death becomes a daily incentive to cultivate compassion. Zen teachings from masters like Thich Nhat Hanh emphasize that life continues through our actions and connections. By recognizing that we are more than a separate temporary ego, the fear of non-being is replaced by an emphasis on touching life deeply in the current moment. Vedantic philosophy, represented by Swami Vivekananda, teaches that a core self remains entirely untouched by the death of the body. In this framework, the purpose of life is to recognize this eternal nature, which renders the end of the physical organism a mere change of condition. When science reaches its limit, mortality becomes a mechanism for urgency. These traditions suggest that by acknowledging the end of the body, we find the necessary pressure to settle old debts and focus on the mind stream, or the self, while the opportunity still remains.